The Book of Mirdad, Chapter 32, on Sin and the Shedding of the Fig-Leaf Aprons. Mirdad speaks. You have been told of sin, and you would know how man became a sinner. And you declare, and not without merit, that if man, the image and the likeness of God, be a sinner, then God himself must be the source of sin. Therein is a snare for the unsuspecting, and I would not have you, my companions, ensnared. Therefore would I remove this snare from your path, that you may remove it from the paths of men. There is no sin in God, unless it be sin for the sun to give of his light to a candle, nor is there sin in man, unless it be sin for a candle to burn itself away in the sun, and thus be joined unto the sun. But there is sin in the candle that would not give forth its light, and when a match is applied to its wick, it curses the match and the hand that applied it. There is sin in the candle that is ashamed of burning in the sun, therefore would screen itself away from the sun. Man did not sin by disobeying the law, rather by covering his ignorance of the law. Aye, there is sin in the fig-leaf apron. Have you not read the story of the fall of man? So frugal and naive of word, but so sublime and so subtle of meaning? Have you not read how man, when fresh from the bosom of God, was like an infant God, passive, inert, uncreative? For though endowed with all the attributes of godhood, yet, like all infants, he was incapable of knowing, much less of exercising, his infinite capacities and talents. Like a lonely seed enclosed in a beauteous vial was man in the Garden of Eden. A seed in a vial will remain a seed, and never will the marvels sealed up within its skin be stirred to life and light, save it be hid in a soil congenial to its nature, and the skin thereof be broken. But man had no soil of his nature to plant himself therein, and to sprout forth. His face was nowhere reflected in a kindred face. His was a human ear, which heard no human voice. His was a human voice, which echoed back from no human throat. His was a heart which beat a lonely unison. Alone, so utterly alone, was man amid a world well paired and launched upon its course. He was a stranger to himself. He had no labor of his own and no set course to follow. Eden to him was what a comfortable crib is to a babe, a state of passive bliss, a well-appointed incubator. The tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life were both within his reach, yet would he stretch no hand to pluck the taste of their fruit, for his taste and his will, his thoughts and his desires, and even his very life were all wrapped up within him and awaiting to be slowly unwrapped. He, by himself, could not do the unwrapping. Therefore was he made to yield out of himself a helpmeet for himself, a hand that would help him unwind his many wrappings. Where else could his help be got, save from his own being, so rich with help because so potent with divinity? And that is most significant. Not a new dust and breath is Eve, but the very dust and breath of Adam, a bone of his bone and a flesh of his flesh. Not another creature appears on the scene, but the self-same single Adam is made a twain, a he-Adam and a she-Adam. Thus the solitary, unmirrored face acquires a companion and a mirror, and the name unechoed in any human voice begins to reverberate in sweet refrains up and down the alleys of Eden, and the heart whose lonely beats were muffled in a lonely breast begins to feel its pulse and to hear its beats in a companion heart within a companion breast. Thus the sparkless steel encounters the flint, which brings forth its sparks in abundance. Thus, the unlit candle is set alight from both ends. One is the candle, one is the wick, and one is the light, though issuing from seemingly opposite ends. And thus the seed in the vial finds the soil where it can germinate and unfold its mysteries. So does unity unconscious of itself beget duality, that through the friction and the opposition of duality, it may be made to understand its unity. In that also is man the faithful image and the likeness of his God. For God, the primal consciousness, projects of himself the Word, and both Word and consciousness are unified in holy understanding. Not a punishment is duality, but a process inherent in the nature of unity and necessary for the unfolding of its divinity. How childish to think otherwise! How childish to believe that so stupendous a process can be made to run its course in 80 years and 10, or even in 80 million of years. Is it so small a matter to become a god? Is God so cruel and so miserly a taskmaster that, with all eternity to give away, he should allot man no more than so brief a span as 70 years in which to unify himself and to regain his Eden, fully aware of his godhood and his unity with God? Long is the course of duality, and foolish are they who would measure it with calendars. Eternity counts not the revolutions of the stars. When Adam, the passive, the inert, the uncreative, was made dual, he forthwith became active, full of motion, and able to create and to procreate himself. What was the first act of Adam made dual? It was to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and thus to make his whole world as dual as himself. No longer were things what they were, innocent and indifferent, but they became either good or bad, useful or harmful, pleasant or unpleasant. They became two opposing camps, whereas before they were one. And the serpent that beguiled Eve to taste of good and evil, was he not the deeper voice of active yet inexperienced duality, urging itself to act and to experience? That Eve was the first to hear the voice and to obey it is no wonder at all, for Eve was the whetstone, as it were, the instrument designed to bring out the powers latent in her mate. Have you not often stopped to visualize this first woman in this first human story, stealing her way among the trees of Eden, her nerves on edge, her heart aflutter like a bird in a cage, her eyes searching everywhere for possible detection, her mouth watering as her trembling hand reached out for the tempting fruit? Have you not held your breath as she plucked the fruit and sunk her teeth into its tender meat to taste a momentary sweetness which was to turn everlasting bitterness for herself and all her progeny? Have you not wished with all your hearts that God would forestall Eve's insane audacity by appearing to her just as she was about to commit her reckless deed, and not afterwards, as he does in the story? And having committed her deed, have you not wished that Adam would possess the wisdom and the courage to abstain from being her accomplice? Yet neither did God intervene, nor Adam abstain, for God would not have his likeness unlike him. It was his will and plan that man should walk the long way of duality in order to unfold his own will and plan and unify himself by understanding. As to Adam, he could not, even if he wished, refrain from partaking of the fruit tendered him by his wife. It was incumbent on him to eat of it simply because his wife had eaten of it, for the two were one flesh, and each was accountable for the other's acts. Was God indignant and wroth because man ate of the fruit of good and evil? God forbid, for he knew that man would not but eat. And he wished him to eat. But he wished him also to know beforehand the consequence of eating, and to have the stamina to face that consequence. And man had the stamina, and man did eat, and man faced the consequence. And the consequence was death, for man in becoming actively dual through the will of God had forthwith died to passive unity. Therefore is death no penalty, but a phase of life inherent in duality. For the nature of duality is to make all things dual, and to beget for everything a shadow. So Adam begot his shadow in Eve, and both begot for their life a shadow called death. But Adam and Eve, though shadowed by death, continue to have a shadowless life in the life of God. A constant friction is duality, and the friction gives the illusion of two opposing sides bent upon self-extermination. In truth, the seeming opposites are self-completing, self-fulfilling, and working hand in hand to one and the same end, the perfect peace and unity and balance of holy understanding. But the illusion is rooted in the senses, and it persists so long as the senses persist. Therefore did Adam answer God when he called him after his eyes were opened, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Also, the woman thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. No other was Eve, but Adam's very bone and very flesh. Yet consider this newborn eye of Adam, which, after its eyes were opened, began to see itself as something different, apart and independent of Eve, of God, and of all God's creation. An illusion was this eye. An illusion of the newly opened eye was this personality detached from God. It had nor substance nor reality. It was born that through its death man might come to know his real self, which is the self of God. It shall vanish away when the outer eye is darkened, and the inner eye is illumined. And though it baffled Adam, yet did it strongly intrigue his mind and lure his imagination, to have a self, which one can call entirely one's own. That is indeed too flattering and too tempting to man, who has no consciousness of any self. And Adam was tempted and flattered by his illusory self, and though he was ashamed of it, because too unreal or too naked, yet would he not part therewith. Instead, he clung to it with all his heart and all his newborn ingenuity, and he sewed fig leaves together and made him an apron wherewith to cover up his naked personality, and keep it to himself away from the all-penetrating eye of God. So Eden, the state of blissful innocence, the unity consciousness of itself, fell away from the dual fig-leaf aproned man, and swords of flame were put between him and the tree of life. Man walked out of Eden through the twin gate of good and evil. He shall walk in through the single gate of understanding. He made his exit with his back to the tree of life. He shall re-enter with his face to that tree. He set out on his long and trying journey ashamed of his nakedness and careful to hide his shame. He shall reach his journey's end with his purity unaproned and with his heart proud of his nudity. But that shall not come to pass till man by sin be delivered from sin. For sin shall prove its own undoing, and where is sin but in the fig-leaf apron? Nothing else is sin but the barrier that man set up between himself and God, between his transient self and his abiding self. At first, but a handful of fig leaves, that barrier has come to be a mighty bulwark. For ever since he shed away the innocence of Eden, man has been very hard at work, amassing more and more fig leaves and sewing aprons upon aprons. The slothful are content to go on patching up the rents in their aprons with shreds discarded by their more industrious neighbors, and every patch in the garment of sin is sin, for it tends to perpetuate that shame which was man's first and very poignant feeling upon his detachment from God. Is man doing aught to overcome his shame? Alas! All his labors are shame heaped upon shame, and aprons upon aprons. What are man's arts and learnings but fig leaves? His empires, nations, racial segregations, and religions on warpath, are they not cults of fig leaf worship? His codes of right and wrong, of honor and dishonor, of justice and injustice, his countless social creeds and conventions, are they not fig leaf aprons? His valuing and invaluable, and measuring the immeasurable, and standardizing what is beyond any standard, is that not patching the over-patched loincloth? His gluttony for pleasures that are rife with pain, his greed for riches that impoverish, his thirst for mastery that subjugates, and lust for grandeur that belittles. Are not all these so many fig leaf aprons? In his pathetic rush to cover up his nakedness, man has put on too many aprons, which in the course of years have stuck so tightly to his skin that he no longer distinguishes between them and his skin. And man grasps for breath, and man appeals for relief from his many skins. Yet, in his delirium, man would do all things to be relieved of his burden, except the only thing that can in truth relieve him of his burden, and that is to throw off that burden. He would be rid of his extra skins, while clinging to them with all his might. He would be denuded, and yet remain fully dressed. The time of denuding is at hand, and I am come to help you shed away your extra skins, your fig leaf aprons, that you may help all yearners in the world to shed away theirs too. I only point the way, but each shall do his shedding by himself, however painful be the undertaking. Wait not on any miracle to save you from yourself, nor be afraid of pain, for naked understanding shall turn your pain into an everlasting ecstasy of joy. Should you then face yourselves in the nakedness of understanding, and should God call to you and ask, "Where are you?" you would not feel ashamed, nor would you be afraid, nor would you hide away from God, but rather would you stand unshaken, unbound, and divinely serene, and answer back to God, "Behold us, God, our soul, our being, our only self. In shame and fear and pain have we walked the long and rough and tortuous path of good and evil, which you have appointed us at the dawn of time. The great nostalgia urged our feet, and faith sustained our hearts, and now has understanding lifted our burdens, bound up our wounds, and brought us back into your holy presence, naked of good and evil, life and death, naked of all illusions of duality, naked of every self except your all-embracing self. With no fig leaves to hide our nakedness, we stand before you unashamed, illumined, unafraid. Behold, we are unified. Behold, we have overcome. And God shall embrace you with infinite love, and straightway shall lead you unto his tree of life. So taught I Noah, so I teach you. Naranda speaks. This also was said by the master around the brazier.